The Old President from Bushveld Doctor by C Louis Leipoldt. Podcast read by Archie Henderson. They talk of him with affection, tempered with respect and a tinge of awe. For Bushveld men knew him as one of themselves, forthright, haggardly honest, with the honesty that presupposes an equality of aim and objective, even if both be to get the better of an opponent. They could assess him at their own primitive values, which acknowledge and admit no differentiation by place or by position. When he was still de facto and de jure president, though an exile in the little villa on the Malibaan at Utrecht, I was privileged to spend 6 hours in his company, the first and last time that I met him. I had found him past his prime, a broken, saddened old man, reflecting with resignation that he could take no part in the negotiations that were, even then, shaping the peace that was made at Vereniging. His health, undermined by fever, had broken down, his eyes were weakened, and although he was allowed to fondle and fill his pipe, he was never permitted to smoke it. Yet he passed the tobacco tin to me, brusquely telling me, "Smoke, son, smoke. They won't let me, but I like to see a pipe going." Then we talked, he animatedly, I listening, all on the understanding that nothing was to be divulged to the newspapers. In his big chair he slumped down, a huge body and a large head, with a face much crinkled and the full lips sagging. One could hardly imagine him as an athlete, as a skillful leader of men, with whom personality counted for more than descent or cultural acquirements. Yet, on occasion, there flashed into his eyes a look of strength, and his low voice vibrated with the remnants of a passionate soul that could still soar and suffer, and was not ashamed to show feeling. A deputation of German students came in, bearing bouquets of wild violets, and he listened impassively to a long harangue on freedom and their sympathy with the Boers. "Tell them I thank them," he asked the interpreter to translate. And when the deputation had left, he threw the violets on the table, replaced his top hat on the carpet, and resumed where he had left off. "As I was saying, son." Here, in his own territory, the remembrance of that interview 13 years before came back to me, when I found myself among men who had known him all their lives, and to whom he was an outstanding figure, whose massive proportions overshadowed every competitor for local fame. He was not yet a legend, for his reputation was too recent to be encrusted with fables, although there are plenty of apocryphal tales about him. Whatever men might think of the manner in which he managed the political affairs of his country, there are few, and those, for the greater part, knew him in his official capacity rather than his private life, who think of him with feelings of rancour. Time has softened the very harsh asperities of party politics that were so frequent when Chief Justice and Commandant General dared oppose him at his elections. Men speak of him now with reverence, not without pity indeed, but with a softness like that with which we recollect something of which we are proud, even though our pride may be checkered with regret for lost opportunities. For the Transvaal, for the Bushveld especially, he remains the patriarch who earned men's respect by his long years of public service and men's appreciation by his rugged, massive personality. To the Bushveld, to the Transvaal, the old president remains the chief, the central figure of a stage so crowded with events and episodes that no one can, as yet, take an objective view of it. The play is too recent, the personality of the actors is too fresh in the memory, and the fall of the curtain on the first act caused such poignant grief to those who had shared the old president's aspirations and believed in his ideals, that it is impossible for them to see the affair in its proper perspective. They discuss it with restraint. When they talk of the old president, as they often do, on the stoep or round the campfire, they like to dwell on their personal relations with him, to think of him as one of themselves. Like all strong men in whom the capacities of leadership are well developed, he was sensitive to a degree that aroused a suspicion of vacillation. His old Secretary of State, Dr. Leitz, can tell many stories to illustrate this inner delicacy of feeling, this fine susceptibility and consideration for what even an opponent felt. Here are two of them. When he found that tobacco smoke was distasteful to me, that the fumes from his pipe worried my eyes, he always put his pipe aside when I came into the room. I can go on afterwards, doctor, when we have done, he would say. The one occasion when I saw him on horseback was late one night. I had gone over to his house, and we had discussed a matter in which I had urged a certain policy with which he was not in agreement. I argued and pleaded, but he stuck to his point, and we parted with some feeling of mutual friction between us. Late that night, it was raining and cold, I was awakened and told that the president was waiting for me. I went out and found him sitting on horseback in the street. I have come, doctor, he said, to tell you that I think after reflection that you were right and that I was wrong. I should not like you to wait until morning before I told you, so I had to come down. I myself experienced some of this consideration at my one and only interview with him. We had been chatting for several hours, I only too eager to listen, although the interview had been granted on the distinct understanding that I was not to make use of anything he said for the paper I represented. He, I can only suppose, liking to discuss the past with a youngster who displayed a sympathetic and curious interest in what he said. Both of us forgot that the luncheon hour was long past, though one of his secretaries, Mr. van Bushkoten, kept running in and out of the room, every advance of his being stayed by the old man's brusque exclamation. Wait, Bushkoten, wait. I have much to tell this young man. Suddenly he halted in the middle of a sentence and took up his pipe, not to smoke, but merely to fondle. You must go and get something to eat, he said. Young fellows must not be starved. Go and come back, and we can continue. I protested that I did not need lunch. You yourself, President. But he broke in. I'm an old man. I take my cup of soup, but you go, or I shall. And his thumb and forefinger intimated how severely he would pinch out any disobedience to authority. I have kept the notes I made afterwards, when that interview was fresh in my memory. They are interesting, and would have been doubly so at the time when the negotiations that led up to the Vereniging Pact were pending, for he spoke freely, paying me the honour of trusting my word that, though a journalist, I would not publish anything he said. I have been told, I was told then by his entourage, that he was a broken old man, not to be compared to what he had been in his prime. But I saw little in him that betrayed senility, except the physical signs of advancing age, the slight tremor of the fingers, the fatigued slant of the head, and the weakened eyesight, for which he had to use stronger glasses. But his voice was sonorous and powerful, his vocabulary rich and forceful, and his talk vivacious, interspersed homely similes that reminded me of conversations with my father's elders. He was a rugged, rough-hewn, primitive old man, with an innate courtesy and a certain indefinable charm of mannerism that was singularly attractive.